Lucas was a young man with an insatiable appetite for adventure and a deep love for the culinary world. Today, his curiosity had led him to a place he had only heard whispers about, La Maison Secrète. This renowned restaurant had an air of exclusivity that pulled him in like a magnet, but there was something else, something more mysterious that surrounded it. The locals spoke in hushed tones about a secret room, one that was forbidden to enter. The idea of a hidden space tucked away from the prying eyes of regular diners piqued Lucas's interest. What could possibly be hidden behind those walls? He was determined to find out. Upon entering, the ambiance was unlike anything Lucas had ever experienced. The dim lighting, the delicate aroma of fresh herbs, and the soft murmur of conversations created an atmosphere of sophistication and intrigue. Yet, the rumors of that forbidden room lingered in the back of his mind, whispering to him as he sat down at his table. What was behind that door? He couldn't help but feel that this place was hiding something truly special or dangerous. Perhaps both. His waiter Marta approached him with a smile, but there was an underlying caution in her eyes. She had been at La Maison Secrète long enough to know the rules, and she wasn't about to break them for anyone. Marta greeted him with her usual polite tone, but Lucas could sense something in her words that hinted at a deeper story. "This is a place of rules," she began, placing the menu on the table in front of him, her eyes momentarily glancing toward the door that led to the back. "The room you might have heard of? No one goes in there unless invited." Lucas leaned forward, his curiosity only growing. Why such a strict rule? He was no stranger to the notion of secret menus, but this felt different. This felt like something he had to uncover. A part of him wanted to respect the rule, but another part, his adventurous side, was already plotting ways to get closer to that mysterious room. As Marta walked away, Lucas couldn't help but keep his eyes on the door to the back of the restaurant. His mind was racing with questions. What kind of place was this? And why was there such secrecy surrounding a simple room? The more he thought about it, the more intrigued he became. It wasn't just the concept of a secret menu or a hidden space. It was the idea that something forbidden was so carefully guarded, as if there was an unspoken power behind it. He felt as though the restaurant itself was drawing him in, creating a sense of mystery that felt almost like a challenge. A challenge Lucas wasn't about to ignore. He waited patiently, pretending to peruse the menu, but his eyes kept darting back to the door. He noticed the other patrons seemed oblivious to the tension in the air, absorbed in their meals and conversations. But Lucas wasn't like them. He wasn't just here to eat, he was here for the story, and he was determined to uncover it. He decided that tonight, he would get a little closer to the truth. After all, how often do you come across a place like this? With a deep breath, Lucas stood up and casually made his way toward the back, hoping to get a glimpse of what lay behind that mysterious door. As he moved, he tried to stay calm, keeping his movements natural, as if he were just another curious diner. But the closer he got to the door, the more he felt the weight of something looming over him. It was almost as if the air itself was charged with an energy that warned him to turn back. But Lucas wasn't the kind to back down. He was determined to find out what secrets La Maison Secrète was hiding, even if it meant bending the rules. Just as he reached for the handle, a voice interrupted him. A voice that was cool but firm. "Is there something you need?" The words hung in the air, sharp and direct. Lucas turned to see a tall, imposing figure, a waiter, likely one of the regular staff members. His eyes were steady, locked onto Lucas's movements, and there was no mistaking the warning in his gaze. Lucas froze. For a moment, he considered backing away, but the thrill of discovery outweighed his hesitation. He smiled, trying to mask his unease, but the waiter didn't seem impressed. The waiter stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said in a low, measured tone, his eyes never leaving Lucas. There was something in the waiter's voice, something that hinted at deeper knowledge, like he'd seen this kind of curiosity before. Lucas hesitated, the cold edge of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just about a rule anymore. It was about something far more serious, something that Lucas didn't yet understand. The waiter continued, his voice quieter now. "The room is off limits for a reason, and breaking that rule could cost you more than you think." Lucas took a step back, a cold chill crawling up his spine. The implications of the waiter's words were clear. He could leave now, go back to his table, and forget about the forbidden room. But that would mean giving up the chance to uncover whatever mystery lay behind that door. The thought of walking away gnawed at him, but his curiosity was far too powerful. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What's in there?" The waiter glanced around the room as if making sure no one was listening. Then, with a sigh, he leaned in slightly. "Some things are better left unknown. Trust me." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Lucas considered heeding the warning, but the fire of his curiosity was now burning too brightly to be extinguished. There was something more at play here, something that Lucas had to see for himself. He nodded slowly, trying to hide his excitement. "Thanks for the advice," he said, before turning back toward his table. But as he walked away, the waiter's gaze followed him, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched by someone who knew exactly what was at stake. Sitting back down, Lucas tried to refocus on the menu, but his thoughts were consumed by the mysterious room. The waiter's warning had only fueled his desire to understand what lay behind that door, and no matter what it took, he would find out. Tonight, he would get closer to the truth. The forbidden room wasn't going to stay a secret for long. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that the night held something more. The waiter's warning echoed in his mind as he sat at his table, pretending to be immersed in his meal. His eyes constantly flickered toward the back of the restaurant, where that forbidden door stood like a silent challenge. The air was thick with unspoken rules, but that only made him want to break them more. Why keep something hidden like this? He thought. There had to be more to it, something worth risking everything for. He couldn't just sit there pretending to enjoy his meal, while the truth was so close, so tangible. The moment had come. He was going to try again, this time on his terms. Lucas waited until the restaurant grew quieter, the hum of conversations softening as the evening wore on. The staff were busy clearing tables, but the door to the mysterious room remained just as elusive. His pulse quickened with each passing minute. He knew the risks. He knew the rules. But his curiosity had already crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The forbidden door beckoned him like a siren call, and this time, he wasn't going to let anything stop him. He carefully rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, as he made his way toward the back of the restaurant, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached the hallway leading to the door, he glanced around, making sure no one was paying attention. The staff were distracted, and most of the patrons seemed to be lost in their own world, their backs turned to him. He crept closer, inching his way toward the door. With a deep breath, he reached out and gently touched the handle, feeling the cool metal under his fingers. The moment was tense, filled with anticipation. Lucas could feel the weight of the forbidden in that simple act. But just as he was about to turn the handle, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The voice was firm, almost too calm, as though the speaker had been expecting this moment. Lucas spun around quickly to see a waiter standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. For a split second, Lucas felt his heart drop. He froze, unsure of what to do next. The waiter, who must have been watching him for some time, approached him with measured steps. "You need to leave that door alone," he said, his voice carrying a weight that sent a chill through Lucas. There was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. Lucas tried to remain calm, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. "I wasn't doing anything," he said, attempting to sound casual, though his voice betrayed him. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, making his palms sweat. He hadn't thought it would be so easy to get caught, but there it was. The waiter was much more alert than he had anticipated. The man studied him for a moment before speaking again, his voice low and cold. "You don't understand, do you? That room is off limits for a reason. People have tried before. They didn't come back the same, if they came back at all." His eyes locked onto Lucas's, as if trying to pierce through his very soul. Lucas felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What was this waiter talking about? Was he simply trying to scare him? Or was there some truth to the warning? For a moment, he considered backing away, accepting that he had pushed too far. But something inside him, something stronger than fear, refused to let him retreat. He had to know what was behind that door. His curiosity was far too powerful. "I'm not afraid," Lucas said, trying to stand his ground, though his voice wavered just a bit. "I just want to understand. What's so special about that room?" The waiter's expression softened slightly, but the warning in his eyes never left. He shook his head slowly. "You don't want to know," he murmured, almost to himself. "Trust me, some secrets are meant to stay buried." Lucas stood there for a moment, the weight of the waiter's words sinking in. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. The phrase echoed in his mind like a distant warning bell he couldn't ignore, but the fire of curiosity that burned inside him refused to let go. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "I'm not afraid of secrets," Lucas replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "If they're buried, maybe it's because they're worth finding." The waiter's eyes flashed with something, perhaps fear, perhaps something deeper, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence looming over Lucas like a shadow. For a moment, Lucas thought the man was going to stop him, to physically drag him away, but the waiter simply exhaled, his breath heavy with resignation. "Do what you want," he said, his voice dripping with warning. "But don't say I didn't warn you when it all comes crashing down." And with that, he turned on his heel and walked back down the hallway, leaving Lucas standing there, torn between hesitation and determination. The moment was electric, charged with the tension of the unspoken. Lucas could feel the pull of the door even more strongly now. He knew that whatever lay behind it, it wasn't just food or drink. It was something much deeper, something that had cost others far more than they realized. He had to see it, to experience it for himself. Slowly, he reached out again, his fingers trembling as they touched the door handle. This time, there was no hesitation. He turned it, the soft click of the lock breaking the silence. The door creaked open, revealing the unknown beyond. As he stepped through, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line. He had crossed into a place where there was no turning back. What he would find in the forbidden room, he didn't know. But in that moment, Lucas understood one thing for certain. The mystery was far more than just a secret room. It was a part of something much larger, something that could change him forever. As Lucas stepped into the mysterious room, his senses were immediately overwhelmed. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of candles casting long shadows against the walls, which were adorned with strange, intricate paintings that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices and something else, something faintly metallic, as if the very space itself carried the weight of its secrets. It felt as though he had stepped into another world entirely, one where the rules of the ordinary didn't apply. The hum of activity from the main restaurant faded into the background, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost too loud. Lucas's heart raced as he took in his surroundings. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a few high-backed chairs placed strategically around a large dark wood table. At the center of the room was a large, ornate door that led to what Lucas could only assume was the kitchen. This was where the magic, the forbidden meals, came to life. His eyes lingered on the door, but before he could contemplate anything further, a voice broke the silence. Looking for something? The voice was low, almost conspiratorial, and it sent a thrill down his spine. Lucas turned to see a man sitting at the far end of the room, his face partially obscured by a shadow. There was something unsettling about his presence, something that made Lucas instinctively cautious. The man smiled, revealing a set of teeth that glinted in the low light, and nodded toward the empty chair beside him. "Join me," he said, gesturing. "You seem curious about the room, but there's something more here, something you'll want to know." Lucas hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond, but his curiosity won out, and he moved cautiously toward the chair, pulling it out and sitting down across from the mysterious man. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating. Lucas could sense that this was no ordinary diner. There was a depth to him that felt ancient, as though he had been part of this place for far longer than anyone realized. The man didn't waste any time. "I know why you're here," he said, his voice calm but carrying an underlying intensity. "You've heard the rumors, just like everyone else. The forbidden room, the secret menu." His eyes narrowed as if assessing Lucas. "But there's more to it than you think. It's not just about a menu of rare ingredients or exotic flavors. The menu in this room? It's dangerous. It offers more than just food. It offers experiences, but at a price you might not be willing to pay." Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something unsettling about the way the man spoke, like he was hinting at a truth far darker than Lucas had imagined. "What do you mean by dangerous?" he asked, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. The man's smile widened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "Food that alters reality, changes the way you see the world. The ingredients are rare, so rare that they can't be found in any market. And once you taste them, once you enter this world, there's no going back. The price isn't just paid in money. Some say it's paid in time. Others say it's paid in something much more valuable." Lucas leaned in, his heart pounding. "What do you mean? What's the cost?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room as if making sure no one was listening. He then leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto Lucas's with a piercing gaze. "The cost is different for everyone. Some lose themselves in the flavors. Others lose something far more precious. But whatever you pay, you'll never be the same." Lucas sat back in his chair, his mind racing. This was beyond anything he had expected. What kind of place was this? He had come for an experience, a glimpse behind the curtain, but now he was realizing that he had stumbled into something far more sinister, something that could change him forever. The man watched Lucas closely, as if measuring his every reaction. "You're wondering if you should take the leap, aren't you?" he said, his voice now softer, almost soothing. "You think you're ready for whatever this menu has to offer, but you have no idea what you're really asking for. People who've tasted the dishes here, they don't walk away the same. They carry the weight of it. Some leave with new knowledge, new abilities, but at the cost of their sanity." Lucas felt a chill creep into his bones as the words settled over him. He had always been someone who craved new experiences, new sensations, but this was different. This wasn't just about taste or food. It was about something far deeper, something that lingered long after the meal was finished. "What happened to the people who didn't make it?" Lucas asked, his voice low. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply smiled, but there was no joy in it. "You'll see for yourself," he said cryptically. "That is, if you're brave enough to continue." The weight of the man's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Lucas sat there, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was drawn to the idea of experiencing the secret menu, of tasting something so rare and extraordinary. But on the other hand, the man's warnings echoed in his mind, casting doubt on everything he had believed about the thrill of adventure. Was this truly something he could handle? Was the price worth the experience? Before Lucas could gather his thoughts, the man stood up abruptly, as though sensing his indecision. "The choice is yours," he said, his voice firm. "But know this, once you step into this world, there's no going back. The menu is more than just food. It's a doorway. And once you open it, it might just open you in ways you never imagined." With that, the man turned and walked toward the far side of the room, leaving Lucas alone with his thoughts. The door to the kitchen stood before him, its mysterious aura pulling him in. Lucas knew what he had to do. He was already too far in to turn back. Whatever lay beyond that door, he would face it head-on. Lucas stood at the edge of the kitchen, the door creaking shut behind him. The scent of sizzling herbs and freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with something darker, something that clung to the room like a secret. He could see the chefs moving with practiced precision, their hands working quickly as they prepared dishes that seemed to come to life in their very presence. But at the far end of the room, standing almost out of sight, was a man who seemed completely different from the others. He was older, his face etched with lines of experience and wisdom. His eyes, though, held a kind of intense focus, as if they were seeing something that no one else could. This man was Miguel, the chef who had created the secret menu, and who now seemed to hold the key to everything Lucas had been searching for. Lucas hesitated, unsure of how to approach him. There was a distance to Miguel, something that made him seem unapproachable, even though he was surrounded by the bustle of the kitchen. But Lucas had come this far. He had to ask the questions that had been burning in his mind ever since he stepped into La Maison Secrète. With a deep breath, he approached Miguel, his footsteps echoing through the kitchen like a signal that he was about to cross a line. "Chef Miguel," Lucas began, his voice steady but tinged with anticipation. "I've heard rumors about you, about the menu you created." Miguel didn't turn to face him at first. Instead, he continued working, his hands moving with a calm, almost mechanical grace. But after a moment, he stopped, slowly turning to look at Lucas with eyes that seemed to pierce through him. "I don't entertain rumors," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen much. "But you can ask. Just know that the answers may not be what you expect." Lucas swallowed, feeling the gravity of the situation settle over him. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change, for better or worse. He had come to this restaurant seeking the truth, but he had no idea how deep that truth ran. Miguel didn't seem to care for small talk. Instead, he gestured for Lucas to follow him as he made his way toward a quieter part of the kitchen, away from the hustle of the other chefs. The sounds of clanging pans and sizzling oil faded into the background as they moved into a small office space, the walls lined with old cookbooks and utensils, some of which appeared to be relics from another time. It was here, in this intimate, dimly lit room, that Miguel finally spoke again, his voice low and tinged with something that sounded like both regret and nostalgia. "You want to know about the menu, huh?" Miguel asked, his eyes locking with Lucas's. "The menu you're so desperate to taste." Lucas nodded, unable to find his voice for a moment. He had been so consumed with the mystery of La Maison Secrète, so eager to uncover the secrets behind the forbidden room, that he hadn't fully grasped the weight of what he was about to hear. Miguel let out a small laugh, but it was hollow, like he wasn't sure whether he should be amused or disheartened by Lucas's curiosity. "The truth is," Miguel continued, "the menu wasn't always like this. It didn't start out as something dangerous or forbidden. It started out as a way to explore the limits of flavor, to push the boundaries of what food could be. But as we experimented, we realized that the ingredients we were using, they had an effect on the people who ate them. Not just on their taste buds, but on their minds, their souls even." He paused, his expression darkening as though he were remembering something painful. "The more we use these rare ingredients, the more we realize that they came at a cost, something we never fully understood until it was too late." Lucas's heart raced as he listened to Miguel's words. The chef's tone had shifted from casual to something far more serious, as though the weight of his own involvement in the creation of the menu was finally sinking in. "What happened?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid that asking the wrong question might lead him down an even darker path. Miguel looked away for a moment, his gaze distant, as though he were reliving the past. "We started to see the effects. Strange visions, heightened senses, altered perceptions of reality. But there were other things too, things that no one could explain. People began to change Lucas. They weren't the same when they left. And I'm not talking about just their taste in food. I'm talking about something deeper. Something that touched the very core of who they were. Lucas was silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of Miguel's words. The room seemed to close in on him, and the faint smell of spices now felt suffocating. He had heard the rumors, of course, about the strange effects the food had on those who dared to taste it. But hearing it from Miguel, the man who had created the menu, made it feel all too real. The chef's story was no longer just a rumor. It was a warning, one that Lucas couldn't ignore. He had come here searching for a thrill, but now he was questioning whether the price was too high. You're telling me that the food here, Lucas trailed off, struggling to find the right words, changes people? Miguel nodded slowly, his expression grave. It's not just the food, Lucas. It's what the food represents. We didn't just create dishes. We created experiences. And experiences change people, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But once you've tasted it, you can't go back. You can't undo what you've seen, what you've felt. It's like opening a door that you can never close. Lucas felt a wave of unease wash over him. Was this really what he wanted? Was it worth sacrificing something as profound as his own perception of the world? But the temptation, the allure of the forbidden menu, the desire to know what lay beyond that door, was too strong to resist. He had already come this far. There was no turning back now. Miguel seemed to sense Lucas's inner turmoil. He stood up, walking over to a small, worn-out notebook that sat on the edge of his desk. The first time we tasted one of the dishes, Miguel said, his voice distant as he leafed through the pages of the notebook. We thought it was a breakthrough. We were wrong, but we couldn't stop. And now, here we are. He closed the notebook with a soft thud, looking back at Lucas. If you're ready to face the consequences of what you seek, then you can go through with it. But remember, once you enter the room, you're not just tasting food. You're tasting something much darker. With those words, the air in the room seemed to thicken, and Lucas knew, without a doubt, that his journey had only just begun. After days of uncertainty and restless nights filled with unanswered questions, Lucas found himself sitting at a corner table in La Maison Secrète once again. His mind had been consumed by the stories he had heard, the things Miguel had revealed. He was drawn to the mystery of the secret menu. But now, more than ever, he wondered if he was prepared to face whatever lay beyond the forbidden room. The strange warning from the waiter, the chef's cryptic words, it was all weighing heavily on him. But despite the fear that had started to creep into his thoughts, the pull of the unknown was irresistible. Marta approached his table with her usual poised grace, placing a small envelope in front of him. There was something different about her today, something in her eyes that seemed to hold a deeper knowledge. "This is for you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's from someone who's been watching you, someone who knows what you've been looking for." She paused, almost as if waiting for Lucas to ask who had sent it, but she didn't elaborate. She simply turned and walked away, leaving Lucas alone with the envelope. Lucas stared at the envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for it. The seal on the front was simple but elegant, an intricate design he hadn't seen before. He ran his fingers over it, wondering who would send him something like this and why. Was this the invitation he had been waiting for? His heart raced as he carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. It was written in fine script, the words crisp and precise. "You are invited to experience the hidden room. Come at midnight and bring an open mind. Your destiny awaits behind the door." The message was clear, but the implications were anything but. Lucas's pulse quickened as he read the words over and over again. Destiny? What kind of destiny was waiting for him behind that door? And who exactly had extended this invitation? Marta's earlier warning echoed in his mind. Be careful. Many have paid a high price for knowing the secrets of La Maison Secrète. But the temptation, the allure of what lay beyond the door, was simply too powerful to resist. The hours leading up to midnight felt like an eternity. Lucas sat at his table, pretending to enjoy his meal, but his thoughts were miles away. The envelope had left him restless, consumed with questions about the invitation and what awaited him behind that forbidden door. Every time he looked at the clock, the seconds seemed to stretch endlessly, and the weight of the choice he was about to make grew heavier. Was this what he truly wanted? To step into a world where nothing was as it seemed? Where the lines between reality and fantasy blurred with every bite? As the night wore on, the restaurant's ambiance began to change. The lively chatter of diners grew quieter, the air more charged, as if everyone knew that something momentous was about to happen. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched by more than just the staff, more than just the mysterious man from earlier. The atmosphere felt alive with anticipation, and Lucas knew that something big was about to unfold. When the clock finally struck midnight, Lucas stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The restaurant was almost empty now, the staff silently moving between the tables, cleaning up after the last guests. Marta, who had been eyeing him from across the room, met his gaze for a moment before nodding subtly in his direction. It was as if she had been expecting this moment all along. Without saying a word, she led him toward the back of the restaurant, her movements precise and deliberate. The hallway was dark, and as Lucas followed her, the weight of the invitation settled over him. The door to the forbidden room loomed ahead, its presence almost oppressive. As they approached it, Marta stopped and turned to Lucas. "Remember," she said, her voice soft but firm, "this is a rare opportunity. Many who have been invited have never returned, or if they did, they were never the same. Once you enter, you won't be able to undo what you learn. Are you sure you're ready?" Lucas swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of fear and excitement swirling together. He looked at Marta, who was staring at him with a knowing expression. She wasn't just warning him, she was preparing him. "I'm ready," Lucas replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. Marta gave him a long, searching look before nodding. She opened the door, revealing the darkened space beyond. As Lucas stepped over the threshold, the door creaked closed behind him, and the quiet of the room enveloped him like a heavy blanket. He was in. The air was thick with the same strange energy that had hung over the restaurant all night, but now it was more pronounced, almost suffocating. The room was dimly lit by candles that flickered in the corners, casting long shadows across the walls. The floor beneath his feet was smooth, cool stone, and the only sound was the soft, steady drip of water coming from somewhere in the distance. The space was simple, almost bare, except for a large table in the center of the room. It was covered with a white cloth, and upon it lay an array of dishes, each one more elaborate and mysterious than the last. The food seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight, as if it were alive, waiting to be tasted. But it wasn't just the food that held Lucas's attention. At the head of the table stood a figure, a man who seemed to materialize out of the shadows. His presence was commanding, almost otherworldly. It was the client from before, the one who had spoken to him about the dangers of the menu. "Welcome," the man said, his voice deep and resonant, like the sound of an ancient bell tolling. "You've come far, Lucas. But know this, what you're about to experience will change you forever. There's no turning back from this point. Are you ready to taste the forbidden?" Lucas's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment he had been both craving and dreading. He looked at the dishes in front of him, each one a work of art, and felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. But despite the warnings, despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind, he felt an overwhelming pull, a hunger not just for the food, but for the truth that lay hidden within. "I'm ready," Lucas said, his voice steady, though his hands were trembling slightly. The man nodded, his eyes gleaming with something dangerous. "Then eat, Lucas. Taste what few have ever dared to taste, and let the experience consume you." As Lucas picked up his fork, he could feel the anticipation building within him. The first bite would be the key. He could feel it in his bones. And with it, he would enter a world that few ever saw. A world where the price for knowledge was steep, but the rewards were beyond imagination. Lucas brought the fork to his lips, and as the dish touched his tongue, he felt an immediate shift in the air. The world around him seemed to blur, and the flavors exploded in his mouth like nothing he had ever tasted before. The dish was like nothing he had ever imagined, a blend of spices that tingled on his tongue, textures that danced across his senses, and a warmth that spread from his chest to his limbs, as though the very food was alive within him. For a brief moment, Lucas forgot everything. He forgot where he was, who he was, and why he had come. All that existed was the food. But then, a strange sensation swept over him, an unease that began to crawl under his skin, like something wasn't quite right. The room seemed to shift as well. The shadows stretched unnaturally, and the dim candlelight flickered in a strange rhythm. Lucas blinked, trying to refocus, but the world around him had started to twist. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in time with his own heartbeat. He could hear faint whispers in the air, as though the very room was alive with voices from the past. His vision swam, and for a moment he felt as though he were falling, not just in the physical sense, but as though he were being pulled into a memory, into something that wasn't quite real. As his senses struggled to catch up with what was happening, Lucas saw flashes, quick glimpses of scenes that seemed to play out in front of his eyes. He saw chefs, but they weren't cooking. They were performing strange rituals, their hands moving over the food with a reverence that felt almost sacred. The room around him shifted, and he saw the same walls, but they were older, worn, cracked. In one flash, he saw a group of diners, their faces full of awe and wonder, and yet there was something dark in their eyes, something that made them seem different. And then another flash, a chef, older, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, standing at the head of a table with an empty plate before him. Lucas gasped, his mind reeling. What was happening to him? The whispers grew louder, and the room seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with its secrets. His heart raced as the images continued to flash in front of his eyes, each one more unsettling than the last. It was as if the food was not just a meal, but a key to something hidden, something far darker than Lucas had anticipated. The flashes stopped as suddenly as they had started, leaving Lucas disoriented, his head spinning. He felt as if he had been pulled through time, through a labyrinth of memories and experiences that didn't belong to him. But as the visions faded, a deeper understanding settled over him, a knowing that had never been there before. The food, the menu, the room, it wasn't just about the taste or the experience. It was about unlocking something buried deep within the restaurant, something that had been hidden away for generations. Lucas could feel it in his bones. This was no ordinary meal. It was a gateway to something far older, something far more dangerous than he had imagined. The room around him seemed to shift once more, the walls growing darker, the shadows thickening as if they had weight. The client who had spoken to him earlier stood at the far end of the room, watching him with those gleaming eyes. "Do you understand now?" the man asked, his voice low and heavy with an almost predatory curiosity. "This menu isn't just food. It's a way to see beyond the veil, to touch the things most people will never understand. But you have to ask yourself, Lucas, do you want to know what lies beyond it? Because once you take that step, there's no turning back." Lucas swallowed hard, his throat dry. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him, the gravity of what he was about to embrace. He had come here seeking the thrill of something forbidden, something unknown. But now he was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a game. The price was steep, and he wasn't sure he was ready to pay it. Yet, despite the fear gnawing at him, something deep inside pushed him forward, urging him to continue. He couldn't stop now. Not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. "Are you ready for the next course?" the man asked, his voice a soft taunt, like he was daring Lucas to step even deeper into the unknown. "Or are you afraid of what you might find?" Lucas's pulse quickened. He wanted to walk away, to run, but the pull of the menu, the allure of what lay ahead, was too strong. He nodded, his decision made. "I'm ready." The man's smile deepened as Lucas spoke, the corners of his lips curling into something that resembled both amusement and approval. "Very well," he said softly, gesturing toward the table where the dishes lay in waiting. "Let's see if you truly understand what you've just agreed to." He moved toward the table, lifting a covered dish and placing it carefully in front of Lucas. The air around them thickened as the lid was removed, revealing a steaming plate of food that seemed to shimmer under the flickering candlelight. The aroma was intoxicating, warm, spicy, and impossibly rich. It smelled like something out of a dream, something so decadent it almost seemed unreal. Lucas hesitated for a moment, but then, as if compelled by something beyond his control, he picked up his fork. The first bite was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The flavors exploded on his tongue, each bite sending a rush of sensations through his body. It was as if the food itself was alive, feeding not just his hunger, but his very soul. He closed his eyes, allowing the sensation to wash over him. But this time, it wasn't just the food that consumed him. The visions returned, more intense than before, more vivid. He saw flashes of ancient rituals, the flickering of candles in dark chambers, the faces of people long gone, their eyes filled with fear and wonder. He saw the chefs, Miguel among them, standing around a fire, their hands raised in reverence, offering up the dishes to some unseen force. It was as if the very act of creating this food had connected them to something far beyond the mortal world. The room around him seemed to distort, the shadows lengthening, merging with the flickering candlelight, until everything around him was bathed in an eerie glow. Lucas could feel himself slipping deeper into the vision, his mind and body no longer his own. He was no longer just a diner in a restaurant. He was a part of something larger, something older, something that had been waiting for him all along. When he opened his eyes again, the man was standing beside him, watching with an expression that was almost pitying. "Do you see it now?" the man asked, his voice soft, as though he knew exactly what Lucas was experiencing. "You've tasted the forbidden. You've opened the door to something that cannot be closed. But be careful, Lucas. The menu is not just a meal. It's a pact that once made can never be undone." Lucas sat back, his head spinning, his heart pounding. The weight of the decision was heavier now than ever. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The menu, the room, the whispers, it was all a part of something far darker than he had ever imagined. But the taste, the experience, it had awakened something within him, something that called him forward, urging him to uncover more. And as he stared at the empty plate before him, Lucas knew that the price of knowledge was higher than he had ever anticipated, but it was too late to turn back now. Lucas sat in silence, the taste of the forbidden meal still lingering on his tongue, but now it felt like a distant memory. The world around him had shifted, and what once seemed like an elegant restaurant had transformed into something far darker, something that held a secret so powerful, it had the ability to change lives. The whispers, the visions, and the overwhelming sensation that something was watching him, they all pointed to one thing. La Maison Secrète was no ordinary restaurant. It was a place where boundaries between the physical world and something far more ancient were blurred. And now, Lucas was a part of it. But how? What had he truly stepped into? He turned to the man, the one who had invited him here, and who seemed to know more than anyone else in the room, the client who had watched him with such interest. "What is this place?" Lucas asked, his voice low but urgent. "What have I gotten myself into?" The man smiled, his eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and something more sinister. "You've opened the door, Lucas," he said softly. "You've tasted the menu, and now you understand the cost. But there's more. This restaurant, this place, it's not just about food. It's about power. The chefs here are part of something much older, something that has been passed down for generations." Lucas felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. The man's words were like a slow unraveling, pulling back the veil on something that had remained hidden for centuries. "What kind of power?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "This restaurant was founded by a secret society, chefs and gourmets who, long ago, sought to push the boundaries of flavor. But in doing so, they discovered something far more dangerous. The food they created didn't just satisfy hunger. It opened doors to something beyond this world. And those who tasted the food became part of a legacy they could never escape." The weight of the man's words hung in the air like a dense fog, suffocating Lucas. He felt as though the room itself was closing in on him, the walls pressing against him, the very air heavy with ancient power. "So, the food, it's a way to access something supernatural?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling slightly. The man nodded. "Yes, the dishes you've tasted. They are the key to unlocking hidden knowledge, but not everyone can handle it. Some are driven mad by what they see, what they feel. Others, like the chefs who founded this place, are willing to sacrifice everything to gain more power. And some, they pay with their very souls." Lucas felt the weight of the words pressing down on him, the room now feeling colder, more oppressive. It was as if the very space around him was alive with energy, ancient and dark. His mind raced, trying to process the implications of what the man was saying. A secret society? Sacrifices? Power? He had come here expecting an adventure, a taste of something forbidden, but what he was hearing now wasn't just a thrill. It was a revelation, one that came with consequences far beyond what he had imagined. "How do you know all of this?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling slightly, betraying the fear that was beginning to claw at him. The man simply smiled, his expression unreadable. "I am one of the few who have been chosen to guide those who seek the truth," he said cryptically. "I've seen what happens to those who think they can control the power of La Maison Secrète. Most don't last long." The chefs who founded this place, they understood that the menu wasn't just about food. It was a ritual, a way to connect with something beyond this world. And each dish they created brought them closer to something darker. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine, his breath catching in his throat. Darker? What could be darker than this? He tried to make sense of it all, but the more he heard, the more everything seemed to spiral out of control. He had tasted the menu, opened the door to this hidden world, but now he wasn't sure he could handle what lay on the other side. "What happens to those who can't handle it?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression grew somber, his eyes darkening with something that felt like pity. "Some lose themselves completely," he said. "They become consumed by the power of the menu, their minds shattered by what they see. Others," he paused, his gaze hardening, "others are taken. They vanish, swallowed by the very thing they sought to control. And the chefs, those who keep the secrets of La Maison Secrète, are no different. They've sacrificed everything to keep the menu alive. But the cost is greater than they ever imagined. Some of them, they're not even human anymore. They've given up their souls for the sake of the dishes they create." Lucas's heart raced as the man's words sank in. Human? Souls? The restaurant? The food? The people? It all suddenly seemed far more sinister than he had first imagined. He had come here seeking knowledge, but now he was beginning to understand that some things were never meant to be uncovered. "Is there any way out?" Lucas asked, his voice cracking with the weight of his fear. The man's smile returned, but it was colder now, more knowing. "Once you've tasted the menu, Lucas, there's no escape. Not fully. You will always carry it with you. The power, the knowledge, it's inside you now, and it will always call to you. Lucas sat back, his mind reeling from the truth the man had laid bare. The room seemed to close in on him, the shadows now taking on a life of their own, stretching and contorting in ways that defied logic. He had come to La Maison Secrète seeking adventure, but now all he could feel was an overwhelming sense of dread. The cost of the knowledge, the power, the forbidden dishes, it was too much. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead, but deep down, he knew it was too late to turn back. "Why are you telling me all this?" Lucas asked, his voice barely audible. He had expected the answers to come with a sense of clarity, a sense of relief, but now all he felt was a deepening fear. The man looked at him, his eyes piercing through Lucas as if he could see into his very soul. "Because, Lucas, you're not just a part of this now," the man said softly. "You are the next chapter. You are the one who will either continue the legacy of La Maison Secrète or see it fall. The decision is yours." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. A part of this? He had come seeking the truth, but now it seemed as though he was entangled in something much larger than himself. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, suffocating him with its intensity. Could he really be the one to carry on the legacy of a place so steeped in darkness? Or would he walk away, leaving behind the temptation of the forbidden menu and the power it promised? The man leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The choice is yours, Lucas. But remember this. The power of La Maison Secrète is not something you can control. It will consume you, and when it does, you'll never be the same." For a moment, Lucas couldn't move. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and a strange desire to know more. He had already tasted the forbidden, and now it was calling to him, urging him to step further into the unknown. But what if the cost was more than he was willing to pay? As he stared at the empty plate before him, the lingering taste of the forbidden dish on his tongue, Lucas knew that the road ahead would be a long and difficult one. The power of La Maison Secrète was now a part of him, and no matter what choice he made, his life would never be the same. Lucas stood at the crossroads of his fate, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like an invisible force. The truth about La Maison Secrète, the power it held, and the ancient legacy it carried were now a part of him. He had tasted the forbidden, crossed into a world he never thought possible, and discovered the dark secrets behind the restaurant. But the choice that lay before him, whether to embrace the legacy or walk away, was the hardest decision he had ever faced. He thought about everything he had learned, the chefs who had sacrificed so much to keep the menu alive, the strange rituals, the power that came with each dish. He thought about the warning the man had given him. Once you've tasted the menu, there's no going back. It was true. He could feel the pull of the power inside him, urging him to continue, to delve deeper into the mysteries of La Maison Secrète. But at what cost? He had seen the effects the menu had on others, how it consumed them, twisted them, and sometimes drove them to madness. Was he willing to sacrifice everything for a legacy that seemed as dangerous as it was powerful? Marta's words echoed in his mind. Many have paid a high price for the secrets of La Maison Secrète, and yet here he was, standing on the brink of something far larger than he could have ever imagined. Could he walk away from it? Could he truly leave the restaurant, leaving behind the power, the knowledge, and the temptation? Or would he give in, accepting the dark legacy that seemed to be calling his name? For the first time in his life, Lucas felt truly torn. The hunger for knowledge, the allure of the forbidden, it all pulled at him, like a magnetic force he couldn't resist. But deep down, he knew that if he made the wrong choice, he would lose more than just his soul. He would lose himself. As he stood there, weighing his options, the man who had guided him into this world appeared again, his presence as commanding as ever. "The time has come, Lucas," he said softly. "The choice is yours. Embrace the legacy of La Maison Secrète and continue the work of those who came before you, or leave and never return. But know this, once you walk away, there is no going back. You will never be the same." Lucas stood in silence, the air around him thick with tension. The man's words echoed in his mind, amplifying the weight of the decision he had to make. He thought about all the things he had seen and felt since stepping into La Maison Secrète, the power, the strange allure of the forbidden menu, the ancient rituals, and the dark legacy that stretched back generations. It had all been a part of something larger than he could have imagined. And now it was up to him whether to embrace it or walk away. But what would walking away even look like? Could he truly turn his back on the knowledge he had gained, on the experiences that had already begun to shape him? Lucas glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the empty plates and the lingering remnants of the dishes that had altered his reality. He had tasted something that very few had ever dared to, and with that taste came a power, a sense of control that he had never known. But it wasn't just power, it was an addiction, a desire that he could already feel, taking root inside him. He wanted more. He craved more. The legacy of La Maison Secrète wasn't just a legacy of food. It was a legacy of transformation, of transcending the ordinary, of reaching for something beyond the limits of human understanding. And now, Lucas was at the center of it. He could feel the pull of that transformation, the temptation to step fully into that world, to become a part of something greater than himself. But he knew deep down that this path wasn't without its dangers. It was a path that led to something darker, something that had already begun to consume those who had come before him. Was he willing to face that darkness? To give up his very soul for the sake of the power that La Maison Secrète promised? The man watched him intently, as though he could read every thought running through Lucas's mind. "You don't have to decide now," the man said quietly. "But know that the longer you wait, the harder it will be to walk away. The power of the menu has a way of taking root, of making you think you can control it, when in truth, it controls you." Lucas felt the weight of the man's words like a heavy chain around his neck, pulling him deeper into the dilemma that was now his to face. His mind raced as he considered the consequences of both choices. On one hand, he could embrace the legacy of La Maison Secrète, become a part of the dark, powerful tradition that had shaped the restaurant and its secrets. On the other hand, he could walk away, severing his ties with the temptations that had already begun to consume him. The choice was both simple and impossible. As he stood there, the faint sound of a clock ticking in the distance seemed to heighten the tension, each second stretching out longer than the last. Time felt distorted, as if he were caught between two realities, one where he gave in to the power and another where he escaped, but at the cost of never truly knowing what might have been. Lucas closed his eyes, trying to find clarity, but all he could see were the visions from before, the faces of the chefs, their expressions twisted by their obsession, the dark rituals, and the otherworldly power that had shaped their lives. He could still feel the taste of the forbidden dish on his tongue, the way it had unlocked something inside him, something that now called to him, urging him to continue, to delve deeper. It was like a drug, a craving he didn't know he had, but now that it had taken root, he couldn't ignore it. The man's voice broke through his thoughts. "Time is running out, Lucas. Make your choice." Lucas opened his eyes and looked at the man, a strange calmness settling over him. He knew what he had to do. The power, the legacy, the menu. It was all a part of him now. There was no escaping it. He had crossed too far into this world to turn back. The decision was made. "I'm ready," Lucas said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "I'll embrace the legacy. I'll take my place." The man nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this. "Very well," he said, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Then the legacy is yours. Welcome to the true La Maison Secrète." As the words settled in the air, Lucas felt a strange sense of finality. His life, his future, everything was about to change forever. And in that moment, he knew that he would never be the same again. Lucas had made his choice. There was no turning back now. As he embraced the legacy of La Maison Secrète, he felt an overwhelming rush of power course through him, a force unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was intoxicating. More than just the thrill of the forbidden, it was the feeling of belonging to something ancient, something powerful, something that transcended the boundaries of ordinary life. But as the euphoria washed over him, so too did the weight of the decision. He had crossed a line, and now he would have to live with the consequences. The room around him seemed to shift once more, the walls stretching and contracting as if they were alive. The shadows danced, and the air itself felt charged with energy. He was no longer just a visitor in La Maison Secrète. He was a part of its story, a part of the dark, powerful legacy that had been passed down through generations. He could feel the weight of the chef's sacrifices, their devotion to the menu, their willingness to surrender everything for the sake of culinary mastery. But with that power came a price, and Lucas was beginning to understand the cost. The man who had guided him through this world stood beside him, watching him with a knowing expression. "You've chosen your path, Lucas," he said quietly. "Now you will learn what it truly means to be part of this legacy. You will create dishes that go beyond mere food, that transcend the physical world. But remember, every choice you make will come at a cost." Lucas nodded, his mind racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. He had known there would be a price, but the reality of it was more daunting than he had ever imagined. The menu, the power, it was no longer just a tantalizing mystery. It was his reality, and he would have to live with it, with the knowledge and the consequences that came with it. As he looked around the room, he realized that there was no going back. The chefs, the other diners, the strange rituals, they were all a part of something much larger than he had ever realized. And now, he was part of it too. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. His life, his future, had been forever changed. He had embraced the power, the legacy, and now he would have to carry it, for better or for worse. As the weight of his decision began to settle in, Lucas couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of unease. He had embraced the legacy, stepped into a world filled with power, knowledge, and temptation, but the cost was already beginning to show itself. The visions, the whispers, they were constant now, swirling in the back of his mind, reminding him of the price he had paid. He could no longer ignore the toll it was taking on him, both mentally and physically. Every dish he created, every ingredient he touched, seemed to bring him closer to something darker, something that he wasn't sure he could control. The man who had welcomed him into this world watched him closely, his eyes never leaving Lucas as he began to prepare the next course. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" the man said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "This isn't just about food, it's about power. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice in order to create something truly extraordinary. But the deeper you go, the harder it is to keep control." Lucas felt the weight of the man's words like a physical presence, pressing down on him. It was true. He was no longer the person he once was. The transformation had already begun. He could feel it in his hands, in the way the food seemed to come alive under his touch. It was as if the ingredients were no longer just food. They were a part of him, responding to his every thought, every desire. And as the power grew, so did the danger. He glanced around the room, at the other chefs, at the diners who came and went, unaware of the true cost of the dishes they consumed. They were all part of the cycle, all feeding into the dark energy that powered La Maison Secrète. And Lucas was no different. He had joined them, embraced the power, and now he would be bound to it for the rest of his life. There was no escaping it. Not now, not ever. The man stepped closer, his gaze piercing through Lucas. "You've made your choice, Lucas, but remember, there is always a price for power. And sometimes, that price is more than you can bear." Lucas swallowed hard, his throat dry. The truth of the man's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He had embraced the darkness, and now he would have to face the consequences. The finality of the decision hit Lucas like a wave, crashing over him with an overwhelming force. He had embraced the dark legacy of La Maison Secrète, but now, as the man's words echoed in his mind, he began to truly understand what that meant. The power, the knowledge, the temptation, they had all led him here. He was no longer just a curious diner. He was a part of something far greater, far darker than he had ever imagined. And as he stood there, surrounded by the strange, otherworldly ambiance of the room, Lucas knew that he would never be the same again. But as the minutes ticked by, a strange sense of peace settled over him. The choice had been made. There was no turning back now. The power of the menu, the allure of the forbidden, had already taken root within him, and with it, he had unlocked a door that could never be closed. He was a part of the legacy now, a part of something that had been carefully cultivated, preserved, and passed down through generations. And though the price was high, Lucas could not deny the pull it had on him, the sense that he was now part of something much larger than himself. The man's voice broke through his thoughts once again, soft and almost comforting. "You'll see, Lucas," he said. "The power you now wield is both a gift and a curse, but it is yours to carry as it was meant to be. You've become one of us." Lucas nodded slowly, his heart heavy with the realization of what he had chosen. The legacy, the power, the price, it was all his now. And though he knew there would be sacrifices ahead, he couldn't help but feel that this was where he was meant to be. The doors to the forbidden had opened, and there was no going back. He had crossed the threshold, and now, the legacy of La Maison Secrète would continue through him. As he looked at the other chefs, the diners, and the strange, ethereal world around him, Lucas knew that his journey was just beginning. The menu, the power, the secrets, it was all part of a cycle that would never end. And now he was bound to it, for better or worse. The mystery had been solved, but the true consequences were only beginning to unfold. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey through La Maison Secrète as much as I did. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Which country and city are you joining us from today? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. There's more to come and you won't want to miss it. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.